With many of us patiently waiting for Season 3 of House of the Dragon, I thought I might as well make a video about the geography of the world building behind this fictional world. Starting, of course, with the continent of Westeros. Since House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones are loosely based off of medieval Europe, the world map is clearly incomplete. After all, this makes sense. People in Europe, in our world during the Middle Ages, obviously did not have access to satellites that proved the existence of much of East Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, let alone the Americas, Australia, and Antarctica. This knowledge would arrive through the way of the Age of Exploration when Europeans were able to sail well off the continental shelf, starting first with the Portuguese. In Game of Thrones, the rough equivalent of Europe is Westeros, a continent named such because I'm assuming it's westward, at least the very most western continent that is known at the time. The other major continent is Essos, which is roughly inspired by parts of Asia, namely the Middle East and the Central Asian steppe. As you move eastward, you get parts that are clearly inspired by other parts of the world, such as East Asia, but we know barely anything about them in the same way that Europeans knew almost nothing about East Asia. Overall, the continent of Westeros stretches vertically rather than horizontally. This vertical orientation means that there's a massive amount of variation in biomes and climates as you move north to south, rather than, say, east to west. And it's further complicated by the fact that seasons here can take years rather than just months. Westeros stretches all the way from what seems to be the North Pole, an area so cold, remote, and inhospitable that we know very little about it. The most northern area is known as the Land of Always Winter, which is shrouded in mystery. There are clearly supernatural elements in the Song of Ice and Fire, and there seems to be some sort of inspiration from the concept of Hyperborea, a mythical frigid land in some classical Greek texts, probably based off of some limited exploration off the coast of northwestern Europe, which over the time was greatly exaggerated into a really cool yet BS story about super divine beings living in frigid winter. Hyperborea is where you get the name boreal forest from, and what do you know? Boreal forests dominate the landscape just south of tundra and the ice sheets of the Lands of Always Winter. This area is home to the Free Folk, also known as the Wildlings, north of the Wall. With a few exceptions, these people are not a unified nation, but rather competing factions of clans and tribes. They are a stateless people who oftentimes view people south of the Wall as decadent, weak urban dwellers, similar to the way that many nomadic peoples in our world viewed civilized peoples. Likewise, the people south of the Wall view the Wildlings, which is by and large a derogatory term, as savages. Again, not unlike the way many settled urban dwellers viewed nomads and hunter-gatherers. Some have compared the giant wall in A Song of Ice and Fire to one wall from our real world during Roman times, known as Hadrian's Wall. Hadrian's Wall was built to separate Roman Britain in what is now England from Scotland, although unlike the one in Game of Thrones, it's not particularly impressive as of now. Nonetheless, it was a wall separating two distinct groups of peoples. In the series, A Song of Ice and Fire, the reason why the wall exists is because the first humans to arrive in Westeros, who are known as the First Men, fought off the Others, also known as the White Walkers, and built a wall to separate them. However, this still left some humans, men, on the other side, and after a period of time, they became different identities, different cultures. The First Men, after all, arrived through Westeros from Essos, via the formation of an existing land bridge, similar to the Bering Strait, that formed the land bridge between Siberia and Alaska, allowing the Native Americans to cross through. While the first free folk do not have a unified culture, part of their shared identity is not being part of the Seven Kingdoms of Westeros. There are also other races, like giants and children of the forest. These predate the First Men or humans. I would say that they're roughly analogous to the pre-Indo-European peoples of Europe, a series of cultures that once dominated the continent but for the most part are lost to the sands of time. South of the Wall lies the Seven Kingdoms and the Riverlands. The most northern one, of course, is, well, the North. For such a creative guy like George R. R. Martin, I'm surprised that he didn't come up with a better name than the North. The North is led by House Stark, and is loosely based off of Scotland, with its highlands and lowlands, lochs, cold winters, austere castles, gingers, and inedible food. There are certain geographic and cultural aspects that make this one of the most distinct regions in Westeros, similar to how Scotland is distinct from the rest of Britain. The first human ethnic group, the First Men, dominated this region, unlike the southern parts of the continent, which were dominated by another ethnic group later on called the Andals. The First Men used to dominate all of Westeros before the Andal invasion, after all. George R.R. Martin probably took inspiration from Celtic peoples. The Celts used to dominate Western Europe, but due to the conquest by the Latin Romans and Germanic peoples, the Celts are now relegated to small pockets of what are now Scotland, Ireland, Wales, Cornwall, and Brittany. The religion of this part of the North is based around what are called the Old Gods, which are not really gods but rather animistic spirits of nature. This is known as animism, which by and large is a sort of catch-all term for a belief system that sees spirits or conscious beings in various natural material forms, be they trees, rivers, rocks, wind, turtles, whatever. They supposedly all have spirits. It's very grounded in nature, and animism has existed in several forms across various human cultures, including some pre-Christian Celtic practices, even though today we tend to associate animism more with Native Americans and indigenous people groups. In more recent years, it has been resurrected by the pagan religion of Wicca, which has become popular by either A, old horny far-left hippie women, or B, far-right young men who think they're the descendants of Odin. Anyway, moving on to this fictional world, the North is also connected to the rest of the continent via a tiny strip of swampy land which acts as a natural barrier, making it hard to invade for both sides. Unless you have dragons, of course. I guess you could say it's kind of like a natural Hadrian's Wall between Roman Britain and the Celtic Picts to the north of what are now Scotland, but the Romans did not have dragons. Before I move well further south, I want to discuss another region that has a profound impact on Westeros despite its small size, and those are the Iron Islands, led by House Greyjoy. This region is loosely based off of Scandinavia during the Viking Age. The Greyjoy motto is "We do not sow." After all, the soil in this region is like that of Nordic countries. Crappy. And their climate also sucks. This means that most people here do not rely on the land but rather the sea for their livelihoods, be it through fishing, crabbing, or a life of raiding on coastal villages off the mainland. Similar to what the Danes and Norsemen were doing during the Viking raids across much of coastal Europe and beyond. Like the Vikings, they are by and large considered to be more of a nuisance than a major threat to most kingdoms, and their lands are among the poorest. However, they have also produced some of the best sailors, and a powerful navy due to their maritime skills. These people worship what is called the Drown God, and I suppose it makes sense for a maritime culture to celebrate some sort of ocean god. This is quite similar to how the Scandinavians were one of the last people of Europe to abandon their pagan gods in favor of Christianity. Now, if you move further south, you'll get to the area that is more indicative of what most of the continent is like. This area is called the Riverlands. It's a flat area filled with rivers, which is great for farming, fishing, and logistics. However, there's a catch. No pun intended. It's flat and is centrally located, which makes it very vulnerable to invasions. This region is one of the most blood-soaked, and before the Targaryens united it, it was largely contested. It was also heavily invaded by Northerners, the Ironborn, and Southerners. This area, by and large, is fairly analogous to Central Europe, namely the Northern European plains of what are now Germany and Poland. The central location of mostly flat land and river systems are very productive, but it also makes them very susceptible to invasions, fragmentations, and stoic battle-hardened people. If you ever wonder why many Germans are so tough, well, now you have an answer. Most of the people in the Riverlands are from the Andal ethnic group, who follow the religion of the New Gods. The Andals were a group of people originally from Essos who invaded the lands of the First Men on Westeros, and ended up dominating the First Men pretty much everywhere except for the most northern and southern parts of the continent. They spread the religion of the new gods, one that sounds polytheistic at first glance, but in reality is monotheistic, as the 7 gods and goddesses are really just different manifestations of the same entity, similar to the way that the Trinity exists in Christianity, with the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit really being different manifestations of one god. Or, for example, the Brahma in Hinduism, where you have tons of different gods that are essentially just manifestations of one pantheistic entity. So, perhaps you could argue that this is a pantheistic, polytheistic, and monotheistic religion all at the same time. This religion also bans slavery, similar to how Europe in the Middle Ages preferred serfdom over slavery. The Andals first arrived in an area known as the Eyrie, a highly mountainous region not too different from the Swiss Alps. And like the real Switzerland, the Eyrie pretty much stays neutral throughout most of the events of the Game of Thrones series. Spoiler alert, until much of the very end. This region also is home to numerous mountain tribes that resist the lords and ladies of the Eyrie as feudal states, similar to the way that many mountainous regions tend to have more rugged individuals that deny the authority of the nation. Did I say nation? I really meant kingdom. During the Middle Ages, the concept of a nation-state didn't exist. And speaking of kingdoms, let's get to the Rock, a former kingdom that is now run by the House of Lannister. This area is pretty hilly and rocky, although not very mountainous. It's where most of the gold deposits are held, making it one of the wealthiest regions. Some have argued that it's based off of England, but I don't really see too much of a clear inspiration here. As you move to the east, you get the Crown Lands, including King's Landing. This is the seat of the crown and the largest population center, and the head of the religion of the Seven. Its location on the sea, along with its fair climate, makes it great for communicating with the rest of the continent and the rest of the known world. Off the coast, there's also Dragon's Isle, a home of the Targaryens, after they left Essos, but before they conquered Westeros itself. To the south of this area lies the Stormlands of House Baratheon. This area doesn't seem to have any strong inspiration from the real world either. It's just really rocky and has a lot of storms, hence the Stormlands. Man, I really could have come up with something better than George R. R. Martin on this one, but then again, I'm not an award-winning author, and I don't have a show based off of anything I've written, so he still wins at the end of the day. Anyway, the same is not true for the Reach, which actually does have a lot of interesting lore behind it, and is led by House Tyrell. This region is the second richest due to its fertile land, and it's the breadbasket in an agrarian feudal economy. I would think that this region should actually be richer than the Western lands because food production is more important and it leads to a larger population. It's also home to the second largest city, Oldtown, held by House Hightower. It's where the Maester's Citadel is located and acts as the central university/library center of learning on the continent. This region also has a strong culture of chivalry, cuisine, and art. I'd probably equate this region to France, given its geography and culture. Moving southward, we get Dorne, which is heavily based off of Muslim Spain, or the Emirate of Cordoba. In fact, the Dornish scenes are actually filmed in southern Spain, which was once held by the Arabs and Berbers, which dominated the southern region of the Iberian Peninsula known as Andalusia. However, eventually the Christian Spaniards would conquer it, along with the Portuguese, hence why you have Spain and Portugal. This region has an arid desert in the show. Spain also happens to be the only European country to have true deserts and arid canyons. The people here are not Andals ethnically, nor are they First Men, but are rather known as the Rhoynar, a people who migrated later on from Essos to Westeros and settled in Dorne, intermarrying with the locals. This led to the rise of House Martell, who intermarried with the leaders of these newcomers. These people are clearly inspired by Middle Easterners, or the very least Southern Europeans, as they have olive skin and dark hair. And they have brown or black eyes. This group of people resisted the Targaryens for a far longer period of time, making use of their desert and canyon terrain. As a result of history and geography, their culture is distinctly different than those of the rest of the Westerosi. They tend to have more lax attitudes towards women, freedom, and children out of wedlock, and for the most part are more liberal, for lack of a better word. And that's the continent of Westeros. But what's west of Westeros? Well, I don't know, but spoiler alert, in the last episode of Game of Thrones, Arya sails west looking for the supposed lands west of Westeros. This could be seen as the fictional world's version of the beginning of the Age of Exploration when Europeans, or in this case, the Northerners of Westeros, explore the unknown parts of the world, landing in, I suppose, what you could call Amerigos. Thanks for watching.